All right, co-chairs meeting kicking off. We're going to be working on the principles today. I'm hoping we can finish these up today because we're so close, so close. Is there anything else that we need to discuss?
We just have the only items. Well, just some of the details for 3 and 4, or sorry, 4 and 5.
Okay, all right.
Actually, there is one more detail for 3 that I realized that we've discussed as a group, and I think there's no one in the group that has debated this at all, which is that the language that we had, remember we were talking about delivery of the desired state declarations from the repository to runtime environment, et cetera. I just think we should change I don't want to spend a lot of time on that right now, but I could just like draft like a little sentence about this, essentially saying that those are synced, and use the pull method as the primary example of that, and just sort of say that simply, because everybody in every single meeting we've had has agreed that that's the way all of our tools and all of the GitOps tools do this. Very, very unlike the CI webhook style, where you're just like kind of like sending all these configurations and packages over, it's always being read.
Yeah, pull versus push is important to me. One thing that gives me a little bit of pause is if I have, like, let's say I have a Kubernetes cluster sitting on a private virtual private network within Amazon, and I have 4 clusters there. There's a configuration with Argo where basically I can set up my Argo server instance on one cluster, and then I can add several other clusters to the management of that cluster. The motion is still pull to that cluster, which then pushes to the other clusters. So I wonder if this would be violating the principle because you're using essentially an intermediary to pull that is sort of like you could argue that it's sort of like a traditional CI kind of approach, in the sense that this thing is
because one cluster delivers the configs to the other clusters.
Yeah.
And you know what that brings to mind as well? The cluster API scenario, where I have one management cluster that has declarations for other clusters, and it's actually pushing out to those other clusters the machine configurations and everything else. So that's kind of another
I was gonna say I don't think it. Yeah, I don't think it. That's one of the reasons why I was suggesting that I was gonna say we should word it as a sync, and describe pull as the example, just to sort of, because we do want, this is the primary use case, but there are cases like what you're saying, like what Argo is doing with other clusters and what Cappy does. Yeah.
Yeah, and your point, Leo, is really good, which is like there are some services out there that basically would allow you to, or as part of your declaration, it will include like AWS resources, and it's like, okay, like at one point do we view that as a pull method, because it's like it has to mess with the AWS API to do that. And like technically it wouldn't even have to be in AWS in order to achieve that. You know what I mean? So like, I agree that pull is actually super important, pulling from the cluster rather than like just triggers, because otherwise you lose continuous reconciliation. But I'm just, yeah, I think pulling as an example is good. I just wonder if I don't want to accidentally cut out like all these use cases where I think they do fit under GitOps.
Absolutely. So the word sync would replace delivery in the detail of the principle. So instead of saying delivery of the desired state declarations, it would say synchronization or syncing of the desired state declarations is fully automated. Like which word?
So basically, deployed automatically. Basically something like this. Just it's really not a big change. It's something that we didn't really get to in the discussions with the whole group, because again, we kept getting stuck like somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
but yeah, like, but it was a point that was raised many times. Just, so one sec. Maybe something like, let me just type out what you were saying.
Sure.
You're all saying. So something like, actually, yeah, sorry, let me just change as few words as possible. So like, I was gonna rejigger the sentence here, but that's kind of silly. Because the point is we want it to be fully automated. So syncing. Syncing of desired declarations between, right? Yeah. You know, this is funny. Remember how the original issues would say, in number 2, it says, for example, Git. I wonder if we want to put like the primary examples here for folks so that they know just what the canonical method is, or if we should just leave that for the supporting documents.
I've always been inclined to say that anything that is implementation specific should not be a component of the principles and will change over time, right? We want something that can outlive Git and will be able to be implemented with the next fancy version control system that will come up.
Maybe, so, I mean, at that point, we'll change the name GitOps to. Yeah, I mean, for example, if this were called Subversion Ops, and this was a model back, you know, when like before Git won the VCS wars, we'd probably have renamed it by now.
You just rename the whole thing State Ops.
Right.
So we don't have to get in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, seriously, version control ops could have been a thing, but
no, it's not catchy. It's not catchy like GitOps is.
Not as catchy. Yes, I forget who said that, but there was a quote by someone saying that like GitOps is like the worst possible but most catchy name that sums up, you know. Anyway, I'll have to find the quote, but
hey, GNU is not Unix.
Yeah.
I always think of that.
Okay, well, in that case, okay, so never mind about the for instance, Git. You know, we can always revisit that if the maintainers want to change that.
It's actually the problem I was having with 3 here is between the repository and the runtime. I was like, oh, repository. Should we say repository? Is there another more like inclusive term?
Oh, sorry. The desired state. Oh shit.
No, but I think repository is a good word. Like anything that's like, because we somewhere talk about desired state is stored in a way. I think a repository is any place where you can put stuff. And as long as that repository where you can put things like applies to the principle too, it's just an applicable repository.
Well, I think it's just weird that we didn't use repository in the second one, but we are going to use it in the third one.
Yeah.
Like I feel like if we're going to use it in the third one, we should use it as part of the definition in the second one.
So like desired state is stored in a repository that enforces immutability, not just in a way.
We could try that and see what the maintainers think. The rest of the maintainers think. That does make sense. Like be as consistent with the language as we can.
Well, like with version and immutable, what was interesting, one of the interesting things about this is that it could be a Google sheet because it's versioned and it's immutable. So you could technically store your state data in a Google Sheet and it would still be compliant. And would we then say that a repository is like little r? Like a repository is just any place where you store something. We just mean it very generically.
Yeah, we were
Google Sheet-
before, I think there was some language around state store, but that was shot down because that has the connotations there are that people are almost always thinking about. I mean, it seems fine to me one way or the other.
Do we even need between the repository? Like, wouldn't it just saying syncing desired state and runtime environment is fully automated? Wherever it's stored doesn't matter.
Yeah, I like that better.
Syncing the desired state.
And the
Sync
runtime
desired
environment is fully automated. So basically.
Well, I think it. I don't think that sounds okay, but I think it reads weird because I think what we want to do is like we want to make clear when folks read this, they're still learning this stuff, right? And even people in the GitOps working group were often describing the desired state as the repository itself, but that doesn't really totally make sense linguistically because, or you know what I mean, like in descriptions, because we're actually moving it. The desired state is the source of truth is the storage of the desired state. You're essentially a repository, but like
the desired
state to
but the desired state could be stored in multiple repositories, could be spread around. Like the desired state of my full system might be my infra repository, operations repository that points to the repositories of all my application teams that have their own desired state. So it's really not one repository that represents the full system, that describes the full system.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be one repository. It's just maybe I think I'm like leaning toward what Dan's saying about repository with a little r. Maybe we should just propose using that consistently because it was already used before. And what we'll say is the desired state repository is what we mean when we're talking about the storage space or spaces for the desired state, whether that's like the cloud hosted database that powers Google Sheets, or whether that's you know, like a hosted Git instance like GitHub, you know, or whether that's, you know, some immutable database system like the one I'm forgetting right now, but you know.
What do you think about this last line idea of syncing the desired state and actual state is fully automated?
I don't like it because, well, it's not I don't like it, sorry. It's not.
You can say you don't like it.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned about that this will be confused with reconciliation itself. That we want to like make it really, really clear that what we're deploying are the manifests. We're not deploying, but what we're syncing are the actual instructions, not somehow trying to sync the desired state and the actual state.
So keeping declarations in there is important then.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what I mean? It is because like otherwise, like that's really a step before the reconciliation step where you are you know, ultimately trying to apply those manifests, you know. You see what I mean? Like I think maybe that's why the language before was syncing from the repository to runtime environment, because it's just easier to say and make clear that you're talking about like, you know.
How about that? What about that? That last one.
Syncing between
Yeah, my concern is this. Here's the main thing is that like just the ambiguity. So like the desired state declarations are both in the source of truth, the repository that's the source of truth, essentially like Git, right, where you're interacting with Git, and those very same desired state declarations are also have to be accessible inside the runtime environment, essentially, yeah, synced, so that it can perform its operations. I think maybe the one of the
So let me see if I understood that you just said. So I have my repository where I have my declarations. What you're saying is, if I were to just make a copy of that repository, like download that repo as a zip file, put it somewhere else, and reconcile from that copy, that breaks the principle. Because the principle actually requires the description, the declarations of desired state to be directly accessed by the runtime environment from its repository and nowhere else. Is that kind of like the missing component?
That's true. I think that's why this step was here in the first place, because that's why we were talking about software agents in the first place. Again, what you were saying, Dan, about the runtime environment, it doesn't have to be its own runtime environment. It can simply be that, ultimately that there is a runtime environment that's pulling this, like, model is basically, it's like you've got your initially we're talking about Kubernetes, so let's just say anything. You've got your declarative configuration for all of your infrastructure and all your apps and everything inside of Git, right? And then you've got a runtime environment where agents are there and they're getting that information. And then they're like, all right, cool. Now I'm going to just make sure automatically to do the best that I can to do your bidding based on your instructions. And you're only talking to Git. I mean, that's basically what. We notify you when there's divergence and whatever else, right? But that's basically what GitOps is. I think the point about a closed loop is also important too. So maybe it does it intelligently, right? Like, but that's pretty much it. That's the whole thing. So like, but I don't think we really at least so far, no one has described the management cluster concept that Dan was describing with Argo, and Flux uses as well, as breaking the principles.
My point of view is that the one thing that we want to communicate with principle 3, right? Because I think we have to remain within the constraints of what we want to communicate with that one principle at this point, right? Is that there is no human interaction, that there is no human action involved in the continuous reconciliation process that is discussed in principle 4. So the real value that we want to communicate is it's automated, it's non-human. That's the one component. That's the one argument that principle 3 is making. So that's the reason I'm kind of inclined to agree with that last statement. It's not about where it's stored. Where it's stored is principle 2. It's not about what does the reconciliation and when it happens, which is principle 4. It's not about the closed loop either, because that's principle 5. The one thing is that the only way to it's fully automated, period. That's the one thing that principle 3.
You're right. Like if we're getting down to an essential description, that's correct. And we could have actually even kept the first sentence, because we don't really say how it's deployed. We could just simply say, or something like that, it may not really be quite as clean, but we could also just not say it at all and make sure and just make sure to highlight that in the supporting documents. And we're going to have a lot of best practices that we want to highlight, right? You know what? Maybe it's just this. Can I just say this? Maybe we just keep what we had, and the only difference is, instead of syncing between, we can just simply say syncing to, because this doesn't really necessarily have to be, you know, who's doing the action. This is just.
Yeah, the only issue we had was about the use of the word repository. But
Yeah, and delivery, right? I guess I was just thinking syncing would help, but yeah, and then repository, right? So what if we, okay, so what if we, you were saying, here's a suggestion. What if we changed that so that we're clear in our language, and we just,
well, then we go back to like, can I use Google Sheets still? And do I want to have an opinion about it?
yeah.
We could just say in a glossary, because repository doesn't eliminate using like a like if you had these stored. Never mind.
Yeah, no, I know. They have some connotations, but they're not. It's a little fuzzy.
Like chart museum, it would be a repository. So that's very straightforward. It doesn't keep it out.
Yeah.
But repository has a connotation that I think would exclude like Google Sheets. I don't care about Google Sheets. It's just keeping it as universal as possible, because it's like, well, as long as it's the requirement is version and immutable, not a repository, right?
Okay, so removing that proposed change, just going back to what it was.
What about syncing of the desired state? I mean, let's change the concept repository to source, because we're talking about source of truth, right? So I don't know exactly how to word it, but syncing of the desired state declarations from their source to runtime environment is fully automated.
Yeah, I like where you're going with this. All right, how about, I'm hearing you. So syncing of the
syncing of the desired declarations from their source to the runtime environment is fully automated.
Yeah, that works.
Maybe then instead of stored in a way, maybe we should say stored in a source.
No, because you cannot store it in a source. Source is the artifact, not where you place the artifact. Wouldn't it be like
it's stored in a
source that enforces immutability version and retains
it doesn't sound as nice.
No.
So that's what I'm saying is like, is their source good? Can we use it everywhere?
I think, yeah, I don't think we can use it everywhere, but from their source to runtime environment, I think that works completely, because source here is used very generically, and it doesn't make any opinion about the source, which is stored in principle too.
That's true. So really, okay.
Yeah, I like that. That's
really
perfect.
is.
From
Yeah,
the,
I think you're right. Okay, so wait, did you change anything else from their? Oh, their source.
there or the.
from source, I guess, just from source to runtime environment, period.
Yeah,
Source, like source,
yeah.
from source to runtime environment.
Perfect.
Okay.
Guys, when we started today, we only had to finish 4 and 5. Now we finished 3. We're ready to go into 4 and 5.
Well, we're kind of getting closer because, yeah, I mean, anyway.
This is cleaner. It's better. Yes, we did it.
A little clearer, and the clarity here we can use as we get farther along. I think that's why my hypothesis about why we had difficulty in the group is that these principles are progressive. Each principle uses the concepts of the previous principles or the language of the previous principles, and if there's even slight ambiguity in the early ones, by the time you get to the later principles, it just seems to explode with.
Wait, I do have one more thing on principle terms.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
From source to runtime, does that imply the push instead of pull? Should it instead be between? Syncing of the desired state declaration.
Yeah.
Between source and runtime, yes, I agree.
Now that could imply that you could make a change to your actual state that would then be made into your real state, but principle 4 tells us very clearly that you can't do that. right? So it's probably okay. I hope.
Now this
Oh,
isn't
no.
like
Scott's adding on the principle. Jesus Christ. They're gonna be here
well,
all
this is
year.
what we were talking about adding before, and we're trying to fold that into number 5. My question is, if we're gonna make that clear here, just that the whole point is that this is deployed automatically. Do we now need this to be its own principle, or is it okay to make that clear within the continuous reconciliation?
I don't understand what you're saying.
What I'm saying is this suggestion before, where the desired state always wins, right? Or the desired state is the sort, or this. We're using language right now to talk about the source, and I'm just wondering, like, does that mean that we need to?
Well, your point is that continuously reconciled doesn't say anything about the source of truth inherently, that we're sort of adding that on. So you're wondering if it would be better as a separate principle.
Yeah, and would it be better maybe before this so that we can reference it, so that we don't have to worry about clarifying that in number 4? Like,
Well, I guess. Well, first of all, if we do that, I of course get rid of Git, right? Because everything is
right.
preceded by
Yeah.
the desired state of a GitOps managed system. So we're always
I'm with
talking
you.
about the desired state, right? So
I'm
the
with you.
desired state must be the source of truth.
I mean, you could say
Ah.
versioned and immutable source of truth.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
this is like the problem we've run into all along. It's like we could just make it all one paragraph, but we're trying to split them off into separate principles so that like just like in short, like the concept of like first we just, anyway, the version and immutable is strange because we're using kind of, it's like 2 things, but it really is just, these are, I think principle 2 is these are the requirements for how your declarations are stored. You know?
I think I like it better as part of continuously reconciled.
Yeah.
I
Because
agree.
continuously reconciled is about software agents and how they behave.
Yeah.
You know, and so the behavior of saying that the source of truth is there, you know, and
Yeah.
we kind of reinforce it even a little bit with operated in a closed loop, to some degree.
Yeah.
And kind of just from a tactical perspective, I think 5 principles fit in most people's
Better than
short-term
6.
memory, but
Yeah.
the more, it becomes difficult.
Once
Okay.
it's more than one hand worth of principles,
That's that.
That's so true. Principles. Okay, so we have what, like 15 minutes or whatever, and I think we can do this, right? So now that we've kind of gotten some of that stuff, okay, that was good. I just want, I guess, rule that out, you know, or at least like clarify that we do want this. We do want this in number 4, right?
Yes, I'm
So-
good with that. And I think, matter of fact, that most of the versions that
Yeah.
have been written have it. Actually, well, whatever. Right? I think source of truth is a good like attribute to the desired state.
Right. So let's narrow down the number 4 options, because we've got some different versions. What the hell are the difference between these? Ultimately.
Software agents maintain system state like a new magazine just passed.
I'll just put one at the top. We know we want it to be like, we wanted to mention this.
You're in the wrong principle, right?
Oops. Thanks. Good thing this is version controlled. Anyway, yeah.
I don't think it is.
It's got a history, doesn't it?
It does. I can. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh, you know what? I don't know if we can access it. Anyway, this is not a GitOps method. Anyway. All right, so, oh man, I'm like reminding myself of the XKCD standards comic. You know, the one about like, we've got 14 different standards. We need one standard to rule them all, you know.
No, we have
Later,
15 standards.
15 standards. But I'll just put this at the top just as like a, like, we know we want the source of truth, right? we want to point to this, the desired state store, you know.
Because what's unique about principle 4 is pulling, is software agents pulling and source of truth, right?
You're doing what?
I think the most important thing of principle 4 is that it's introspective and continuous, right? It's not something that happens once on an event.
Yeah.
It's continuous, and it's continuously watched from within. It's so that drift is identified.
Yeah. Well, it's continuously. Well, I think that the watch from within part, I think, it goes into the closed loop concept. I think maybe that fits better with the closed loop, because it's really talking about a feedback loop from the output of the system itself. You know, so
I think what we had a lot of discussion about principle 4 is whether we could say that reconciliation is a required given fact that occurs continuously, or whether just actions would be taken to attempt continuously to continuously reconcile. Well, wasn't that kind of like one of the items that produced multiple versions?
yeah, and that's why with the whole group, you mean, or you mean since we like decided to try
When
learning
now that
things.
we if we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different versions.
Yeah.
Some of them talk about needed actions. Some others bring the word attempt in to apply the desired state. Others specifically talk about divergence detection.
Yeah, right. Well, so here's what's interesting here is that in the old version 4, it really just said software agents, and that's just describing the fact that there are agents that are running in the runtime environment, you know, period. And so I think, like, where did we go from here? Like, oh, sorry, one sec. It basically said, wait, let me bring this over closer so I can. Yeah, it basically said what the agents do. It's just saying that they're reconcilers, right? Really, like, I think this was, in some ways, it was like much simpler, because it was saying, you know, like in the next principle, like we have to make sure that there's syncing between the, you know, the desired state storage and the runtime environment, right? So that in the following principle, the software agents can then access that configuration, or reconcilers can access that configuration, you know, and reconcilers are running in the runtime environment. And I think, like, the reason that closed loop was separated as a 5th principle was just because it really emphasized the closed loop concept. And what we tried to do earlier with the GitOps working group was to merge the principles committee that we ended up calling a committee, because there were just consistent people that showed up to those discussions, tried to merge several of these together. And I think we recognized now that we're like, oh my God, how much time has passed? Like, we can't wait years to make an initial version of this, right? So, or an approved version of this by the working group. So we're like, look, let's separate them back out again, because they really didn't work very well trying to combine them, you know? So that's the only place I'm at. And then what we're ultimately saying here in number 4 is really just that, like, the actions that are taken are coming from within the system, right? Is that kind of what you were saying before, like that?
Well, actually, I think what's most important about this principle, because we already talked about automatic synchronization in principle 3, right? to me, the most important attribute of a system that applies principle 4 is that it's continuous, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing, right? We already know like there's got to be some form of software agent performing this action, because principle 4 is all about automation. You cannot do something fully automated unless there is a software agent doing that. There's no way for a human to do something fully automated, right? So the fact that it's software agents is implied by principle 3. What is nowhere defined is the cadence, the trigger that produces, the trigger that causes a GitOps system to
All right, so
reconcile.
how about this? Since operating in a closed loop really describes how the actions, basically actions are intelligently initiated, right, or attempted based on feedback from the system. That's the whole concept of closed loop. Maybe we don't really say what the software agents do, just say they're continually running.
Yeah, that the states are continuously being matched up one
Yeah.
against the other. That it's not like the state is not checked once and you're done with it. That the state is not checked when just the PR is merged. That state is continuously being compared.
Okay. So
that's to me the biggest value.
Right. So, and that's why we want to say that the state store is the source of truth, the desired state. So okay, so actually, okay, maybe this one by Dan really says that. Hang on.
Software agents monitor desired state against actual state and continually.
Oh, except for continually attempt. Maybe the thing is this, the actions we can say we can describe as part of the closed loop, just like the original one did. Ultimately, we just like make the language a little bit more inclusive, right, and consistent. So really, just software agents are continuously running to compare I don't know.
But what if, like, if what you're saying, Scott, is that the actual action attempts are part of the closed loop, but then it doesn't reconciliation, because the principle is continuously reconciled, not continuously compared, and reconciled
right.
means that you're actually, your end state is one that is reconciled, that is synchronized, that is consistent, right? It's not continuously compared.
Yeah. Yeah. Damn. So maybe. All right. How does this last one sound?
Software continuously observe the system's cycle state. I think that's an accurate representation of what the agents should be doing.
And the point is that the point of what we want to say with the continually reconciled, I think it may be, now that we've like discussed it more, because we're saying that that's happening, but the closed loop point will just make a separate point. It's still a point about how these are continuously reconciled, or how reconciliation happens. Like reconciliation is continuous here, and then the system is operated in a closed loop really just means that the system is looking for, like, it's not just a dumb system that simply like tries to do the same thing over and over, and then you as a human have to get in and figure out what went wrong. It intelligently does different things based on the feedback that it gets from the actual system, right? From the observed output. You know, so I guess that makes sense. All right. Do we have any, like, just at least between us right now, do we have any problem with, is there anything about this last one that, I see that I wrote it, but I think what I did was I just took pieces of the things that we all wrote and tried to put them together. What is that? How does that sound?
Software agent continuously observe the system's active state and initiate action. I think that's accurate.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a little muddy.
It's a little long, right? Yeah, I know.
It's got it all, but it's a little muddy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could just kind of reduce its size. Software agents continuously observe. Like, I think whenever any divergence is detected is obvious because there is no need to reconcile when there is no difference. So what if this is eliminated? I'm gonna make another copy just.
Yeah,
so
maybe you're right. No, it's okay. It's okay. You can just change it.
We want to keep source of truth.
Okay.
Software agents continue to and initiate action to reconcile the desired state, period, as its source of truth.
Oh, I think it should be desired state declarations because in the last principle we're deploying, or we're making sure that those declarations are in the runtime environment or accessible to the running agents already.
But remember that there's the desired state that the GitOps managed system must be is kind of like what is the introduction to all the principles. So I would even argue that you don't even have to repeat desired state. You just have to say declarations. Because the introduction to all of them is the desired state of a GitOps managed system must be. We're always talking about the desired state.
I agree with that. I tried to do that earlier, and I remember that caused some kerfuffle with the group because they're like, declarations could refer to anything. It's like, well, I think it's pretty obvious that like the first couple of things are describing the declarations.
But that's the reason I'm thinking, like, when we say desired state, we are talking about something that is declarative, because the first principle says its desired state is expressed declaratively.
I agree with you. Any of those could work. The only reason that it feels, I'm not like trying to like create a hill to die on like unnecessarily, but the only reason that feels weird to me is that like it's very easy when someone describes the desired state for them to think about the actual state store itself, you know, the source of truth state store itself. Whereas principle 3 is making sure that those declarations that are from the source of truth are like now in the hands of the
No,
agent.
I mean, it's just one word. So let's keep desired state declaration. So if we were to remove another word, just to
Or
make
you
it
can just say
shorter.
remove desired state and just say declarations if you want. That's cool with me.
Software agents continuously observe the systems.
No, okay, this actually is better now that you remove that. You know what? Can I just
Yeah, I think that's fine with him.
try to help us here? I think
Software agents continue to observe the system's active state and initiate actions to
you just
reconcile.
made it better because it was too long and I knew it. And you're right.
I would like to make it even shorter, if at all possible.
Well, maybe let's move on to number 5 real quick if we can.
Okay.
And like be like,
We are at time.
oh, damn it. What do you guys have? Do either of you have like an extra 5 minutes?
5 minutes I do have, but not,
I can do
not a
5
lot
minutes,
more.
but
Yeah.
All right, let's set a hard time for 5 minutes. All right, number 5, because I'm just thinking our last thing is we want to just send this to
Yeah.
for feedback. It doesn't, they might say like, oh, let's adjust the word slightly, you know?
Yeah.
So
Actions are initiated. See,
Let's-
I would just kind of remove option number 1 because it's saying the exact same thing that principle 4 is saying.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
I'd get rid of that one. Different actions are initiated depending on input from the assigned actual state. What is that we're trying to communicate with principle 5?
I think ultimately that this is that it's really a feedback mechanism, not just an open loop, but a closed loop, like in control theory. I think that's the main point. And like, how does that apply to people? I think it just means that you can trust your reconcilers you should be able to trust your reconcilers to do the right thing, not just be a simple like apply script, you know?
So yeah, so what's the scenario?
Scenario is you try to let's see. I can think of a couple of different ones, but I don't want to be too specific.
No, just to help me understand it. You can be specific.
Yeah, like let's just say we're talking about like Helm integration, right? Which all the major GitOps tools have.
Yeah.
Helm has different lifecycle hooks, and things need to be applied in a specific order. One way to do it is to just hand it off to the Helm client, which has some of this logic built into it, but it's not really like retries and other things like that are really outside the scope of the Helm client.
Yeah.
So for example, if you're in I'm just thinking of like a number of different issues where.
So let me kind of propose a scenario, okay?
Yeah.
To see how would a GitOps system work in this scenario. I have a customization, okay? I have version 1 of that customization. I have applied it to the system, and it worked. So the system reconciled. I make a modification to my customization. Actually, let me change it. I have 2 customizations: customization 2 and customization 1. Customization 2 depends on customization 1. I apply them both, and they work, and my system is reconciled. I delete from my desired state customization 1, on which customization 2 depends. I reconcile. What happens to customization 2 in that closed loop?
Like it starts failing.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's failing. It's failing an possible action of the closed loop, or should a GitOps system handle that differently?
Exactly, and that's okay. So I think I can answer your question, Dan, to be like really the only two. I was trying to be broad, but the only 2 scenarios I can really think of right now are notifications and limiting retries.
So what you're saying is closed loop means a failure should not be silent.
A failure should not be silent, but also that can be the logic at which you might specify within. I mean, Argo gives you the option to specify a number of retries, right? I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I should really.
Because retries and everything else we've talked about so far, I feel like is covered by continuously reconciled, because you
Yes.
keep trying it, you know.
If it just does the same thing over and over forever, regardless of what happens. But you can set a setting that says, I want to retry this, like a maximum of 20 times. We don't have a method of
we don't have any restriction here on like, oh, it might apply multiple strategies to reconcile. That's not something we take an opinion on. It might do that, it might not do that. It sounds like what you're really talking about is that 5, the software agents should provide timely feedback. Like it sounds like what you're really looking for is a feedback mechanism.
Well, they should be aware of their own like the software agent should be aware of, like basically they're not just like a simple dumb run that has no idea of anything outside of itself. The software agent should be aware of feedback from the system, from previous attempts, from its own attempt and from its own previous attempts. So like, for example, even if we're talking about notifications, you want notifications to be intelligent. Most of the time, you don't just want them to be a fire hose. Logging, you want to be a fire hose.
Yeah.
Notifications, you don't want to like receive like, you don't want to like
So,
wake up
okay,
and
so
receive
what you're
1,000
saying-
notifications that are the same because you've retried like 1,000 times, you know?
So what you're saying is that every reconciliation attempt should consider the output of any prior reconciliation attempt as a component of the actions to be taken.
Yeah, any prior, right, that's true. Any prior that's true, yep.
So
Yeah,
let's
like
say,
if you look, yeah,
let's say I change my declaration to say that I want more nodes, and the system that I make that declaration on can't provide more nodes. So it's continuously looking and saying, it's supposed to have 5 nodes, it only has 4. I'm trying to get 5 nodes, I can't. The API, it's not providing me another node. So what does this principle then mean? It sends me an alert, or it says, hey, I can't do that. Like, or there's some maximum retry or something.
yeah, I mean, that's the, right, exactly. So that's why the answer is yes, depending on your agent, depending on how you can, sometimes depending on your configurations, and sometimes depending on things that might be built into the agent itself, depending on what tool you're using. You know, I mean, I can tell you, I know more about how Flux does it than how Argo does it. I want to look into more under the hood about how Argo is doing that currently, and other tools. But for most tools, I mean, even with yeah, I mean, basically with like Kubernetes controller runtime, you can have different responses based on certain events, because what you're trying to do might excuse me, different, not events, I'm sorry. It used to be conditions now, based on different conditions that are their output to your CR, basically their output by the system based on things that are happening, and then your controllers may respond differently based on what stage you are in those conditions, or when those conditions are met. You know, I think, I don't know if I have a really good description right now of why a closed loop is important, except for that, you know.
Well, I'm thinking of if I go to make a change to a
Yes.
like a PVC, and there's PV protection, you know, so it doesn't want to, it can't recreate it. It needs to be deleted and then recreated. You can't just apply it. And I still feel like this is sort of covered by 4, even though we don't say like, the agent should be smart enough to do something, because smart enough to do something basically means we don't know how to describe a principle that covers the eventualities. So
Yeah,
I would say that
that's
at
true.
current, I don't understand the value of 5 as its own independent principle, because I think 4 and 3 cover it so strongly. So if it's about notifications or something, and that's one thing, but I just don't see. Yeah,
I totally hear you.
Yeah, I think it's not that I don't see the value, is that I don't think I understand I don't think I'm fully understanding.
You mean like how to future-proof it in such a way where
Like what is the
principle, yeah.
meaning? What is the meaning of closed loop in this scenario? What is the meaning of desired? Because we're also talking here about desired state, right? So how is, if we're talking about desired state is operated in a closed loop, that means that something is flowing back into the desired state.
No, it's not. It doesn't.
But that
it means that
but that is
input-
what I hear you.
Input is
But
flowing back into the agent.
correct. But if you read this independently, the desired state of a GitOps managed system must be operated in a closed loop. That's just one sentence. One very likely way to interpret that is that a system that is managed by GitOps is going to it's going to feed back into the desired state because the desired state is operating in a closed loop.
Is this about
Oh,
like a meta state? Like we have our state, but then we have this sort of meta state, which is like, I've attempted to do this thing and I should have a policy for how to deal with if I can't do this thing. There should be a policy that allows me to make some sort of concession or something. Like I've declared a state that has an image that has a known severe security vulnerability, and I also have, as sort of my meta state, a policy that says that can never be deployed. So that would like override the desired state. But I don't know, is that what it's about more so?
that's a good example. I mean, I think you're right. It's a good example. Like basically, I'm like trying to like think of like really good, like obvious examples as a way to explain it. Because I didn't invent this, you know. These were from these have been around for like the last several years. And in fact, I just remembered that we in our earlier attempt to combine several of the principles, it just led to a lot of debate. And one of the big debates, if you remember from Moshe, was again, there are many different issues that came up and perhaps reasons why there were misunderstandings or whatever. But one of them was that, you know, now I'm just thinking as much as I can back on one of his issues about wanting to keep a closed loop in the description of principle 4 as it used to be, you know, when they were combined. The group really felt that it didn't belong there. And the one thing that I don't think really, for some reason, came up was, oh, well, why don't we just like keep that as its own principle, just like we have in the README right now of the GitOps working group, you know?
Yeah.
That's the only reason I was suggesting coming back to it. I don't really have any.
Well, you know what I would do, right? Like, if we were to think in that direction, I'd say principle 4 continues to reconcile. No, we go back to the same.
Yeah.
Guys, listen, we time boxed it to 5. We've given it 12. We're coming up on 13. I need to run. Should we set time on Monday?
Yes.
Can we? How about this as a question? Can we? Thanks for the extra time. Can we send principles 1 through 4 to the maintainers and ask their feedback about the value of keeping a closed loop as principle 5? Because like I don't think we're like playing God here. We're just trying to incorporate feedback that we've had so far and get the ball rolling. So we need their feedback. Can we just hear what they have to say? Everyone else in the group hear what they have to say.
I am very anxious about trying to give it a partial review, because then like if we're saying, well, we can't articulate fully the value of 5, so we're going to remove it and send them, here are the 4 principles. Is there anything missing? That's one thing. But sending it and saying we're still working on the 5th principle, I feel like is.
No, I was just saying that what you said right then is what we should probably do. Is say we can't right now, with all the feedback from the group, justify why this should remain as a principle, as a requirement. You know, basically, like GitOps agents can work, or basically the system can work in a closed loop. Does it always have to? That is actually a good question. You know, maybe that's just the additional question that we ask, and we point to the original principles, and we don't even try to say we're going to keep working on 5. Do we need to keep working on 5 is the question, right?
I like Dan's approach of saying, you know, these are principles 1 through 4. We think these are basically covering all the bases of a GitOps system. There is GitOps, this principle 5 that we really cannot identify whether there's anything missing that should be incorporated by that principle. And I guess
I might prefer actually just putting out and saying what's critical about this principle. This is one we're stuck on and we're working on, and we can't articulate. Just because, like, I don't know, I feel like I don't want to make the decision in haste to say we're removing this thing either, you know, it's just.
Yeah,
So how about this? Yeah, how about we, how about we do that and we, yeah, how about we just do that? We send that email to the maintainers.
Say, hey, we're struggling with principle 5. Does anybody have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, we feel that 1 through 4 seem to cover our bases. 5 seems like an important concept, but is it a requirement that should be a principle? And if so,
yeah. And what is even the interpretation of the concept? Because I think what we're
Yeah.
identifying here is that through all the feedback that we've come from the community, it's still quite ambiguous. And
Yeah.
we just can't make sense of it. All right, cool. I really gotta run now. Okay.
you want me to send
So
that email? Or do you want me to?
I'm okay
And
with
let's set
that.
some time for Monday afternoon. My afternoon after 1 p.m. Costa Rica, 1 p.m. Central is wide open. So,
We have a meeting
no,
on
wait.
Monday already
Wait.
scheduled.
Oh, great. Then we're
2
good.
p.m. your time and
Yes.
4 p.m. your time.
I'll send that email exactly as you said it in the meantime and see if we get feedback by Monday, just to
Yeah.
before Monday. Okay.
I think
Okay,
it's
cool. All right. Have a good
Hey,
weekend, guys.
thank you.
Bye.
Sorry for the time. Bye.
Yeah.